of those at home.
Thank you very much indeed, Anita. And thank you, Lee and Gal. I'm sorry you didn't win our jackpot today. That will therefore roll over onto the next show when we will be playing for £2,000. Join us then to see if someone can win it. Meanwhile, it's goodbye from Anita.
Goodbye.
And it's goodbye from me. Goodbye.
Over on BBC Two now, 4 new contestants in Richard Osman's House of Games. Up your Monday night energy with an exhilarating journey on iPlayer, Japan to Indonesia. The ultimate travel challenge, race across the world. Press red now.
How's things in Belfast? Bit mad?
Yeah, a bit mad.
Looks like there might be a new player in town.
Tensions are high. We're policing an area that could explode at any minute.
Coming here is an insult to this community.
Blue Lights. Press red for all episodes on BBC iPlayer.
So there I was, frozen under the ice. I came back from the dead.
He hasn't talked for half a century.
2 words. British Bulldog.
We can't talk about this tomorrow because you ran over my son.
Just clipped him.
Next window.
My next window's tomorrow night. Over.
Can't hit on all the mums.
Not just the single ones.
Mammoth. Press red for all episodes on BBC iPlayer.
Tonight, Professor Brian Cox takes us on a musical adventure exploring the secrets of the universe.
Martin Clunes explores the beautiful islands of the Pacific.
And Joe Crowley meets the mudlarkers who've unearthed some incredible hidden treasure.
We'll see you at 7.
This is BBC One, and at 6, the news with Sophie Raworth.
At 6, Huw Edwards resigns from the BBC on medical advice. Huw, who worked here for 40 years, has been off air since last July after allegations that he paid a young person for sexually explicit photos. Also tonight, the Prime Minister's plan to deter migrants. Rishi Sunak promises flights to Rwanda by July.
Hello from Westminster. He'd promised to send migrants by the spring. He now says it'll happen by the summer. But first, he has to pass a new law tonight.
More pain for homeowners as 5 mortgage lenders increase their rates again, with others expected to follow. How crucial technology on so-called smart motorways has been hit by hundreds of power outages.
On BBC London, the row over the treatment of a Jewish man during a pro-Palestinian march. The Met Police Commissioner meets the Mayor and members of London's Jewish community.
Good evening. Huw Edwards has resigned from the BBC, saying he was leaving on the basis of medical advice from his doctors. The BBC has confirmed that he has not received a payoff as part of his departure. He worked at the BBC for 40 years, the highest profile and highest paid news presenter who also fronted major national events, most recently the King's coronation. But he has been off air since last July after newspaper reports emerged claiming that he had paid a young person for sexually explicit images. Our culture editor, Katie Razzle, reports.
Very good evening from Edinburgh.
This was the last time Huw Edwards appeared on air, back in July last year.
Tonight at 10, no breakthrough yet in the latest round of
He'd been at the helm of the BBC's flagship News at 10 for more than 2 decades. Today, the presenter resigned and left the BBC, 9 months after allegations about his private life made headlines.
Tonight at 10, one of the biggest military operations of the past.
The BBC said, after 40 years of service, Huw has explained that his decision was made on the basis of medical advice from his doctors. The BBC has accepted his resignation, which it believes will allow all parties to move forward.
The moment of crowning has arrived.
Huw Edwards was more than just a regular presenter. He's been the face of the BBC through some of the nation's landmark moments.
For the 4th time in the space of 5 years.
He presented elections,
We're live in Downing Street, where
and held our hands through royal and state occasions, even announcing the death of Queen Elizabeth.
Palace has just issued this statement.
But a newspaper headline changed everything. Last summer, The Sun published a series of articles alleging that an unnamed BBC presenter had paid a young person to send what the paper described as sordid images. Within days, lawyers representing that person said it was totally wrong and there was no truth in it. But speculation about who the unnamed BBC presenter was ended when Huw Edwards' wife issued a statement revealing his name. She said he was suffering severe mental health issues. Police said there was no evidence anything illegal had taken place, but Huw Edwards remained suspended, and the BBC said its internal investigation into the presenter's behaviour would continue.
there are 650 MPs.
Resolving the issue of whether he would return to screen has taken months, during which it's believed Huw Edwards, the BBC's highest paid news presenter, continued to receive his salary, around £440,000 a year.
Welcome to Windsor for this.
Today, his 40-year career at the BBC is over. From reporting on politics for BBC Wales to his prestigious role bringing the news to the nation, this is now the end of an era.
On Newsnight, that's on BBC Two right now.
Well, Katie is with me now, and you mentioned there an internal review that it's understood was going on. What happens to that?
Well, so in fact, there have been several reviews, as I understand it. There's one very public-facing one, which was the procedural review after the parents of the young person involved complained and said their complaint was ignored. So that review was published. The BBC has beefed up its processes to ensure that doesn't happen again. I also, as you say in the piece, mentioned an internal review, which the BBC's never confirmed, but an internal review into the presenter's behaviour. Or it's never confirmed what was going on with that. That's because it's an HR issue, and my sense is that now Huw Edwards is no longer an employee. That falls away. That matter is now closed. The BBC's confirmed that as of today, this resignation, they've not made any payment to Huw Edwards to leave the BBC. That, would be standard procedure in any resignation. You don't usually get a payout. But as I said, he was continuing to be paid up to now, which is also standard BBC policy when someone is suspended. I mean, more broadly, what this means for the BBC is some form of closure. It can now proceed with announcing its plans, who's going to present the election coverage that's obviously coming up fairly soon, who'll lead the presenting team on News at 10. The statement they put out talked about both parties moving forward, and we do not know what that means on Huw Edwards' part.
Katie Razzle, thank you. The Prime Minister has insisted that his flagship bill to send migrants to Rwanda to deter them from crossing the channel in small boats will pass through Parliament tonight, no matter what. The bill is currently going back and forth between the House of Commons and the House of Lords and is being voted on tonight. Stopping the boats has been one of the Prime Minister's key election pledges. He says that flights to Rwanda will leave in 10 to 12 weeks' time, so by July, with an airfield on standby and charter planes booked. The Home Office has released new figures showing the backlog of people waiting to be removed from the UK. It has risen from almost 1,800 in July last year to just under 52,000 a week ago. Let's go to Westminster now and get the latest from our political editor, Chris Mason.
Yeah, hello to you, Sophie. Those figures you just mentioned there give you a sense of the scale of the issue and underline the argument the government makes, saying it has to look for a novel, eye-catching idea to try to put off people getting in small boats over the channel. But this idea for 2 years now has been bogged down in legal and parliamentary problems. The latest being the House of Lords repeatedly trying to change it, wanting independent monitoring to prove that Rwanda is safe and wanting exemptions for those who have worked for the UK abroad, for instance, in Afghanistan. The government, though, is now leaning in to trying to get this sorted, at least as far as a new law is concerned, tonight. And they are preparing for rather a long night. Rwanda. Is this country in East Africa at least part of the solution to the huge pressures of international migration? The government thinks so, but it's been one heck of a journey to try to get asylum seekers sent there.
No ifs, no buts. These flights are going to Rwanda. Enough is enough. No more prevarication, no more delay. Parliament will sit there tonight and vote no matter how late it goes.
And he said once their idea is law, they are ready.
We've increased detention spaces to 2,200. To quickly process claims, we've got 200 trained, dedicated caseworkers ready and waiting. To deal with any legal cases quickly and decisively, the judiciary have made available 25 courtrooms.
But hang on, there are some parliamentary shenanigans first. When a planned new law is very nearly there here at Westminster, but there is a disagreement between the House of Commons and the House of Lords, we enter something known here as ping pong, when the idea pings and pongs between the Commons and the Lords, potentially over and over again, until they agree. And that is what's happening tonight.
Thank you.
First up then, the House of Commons.
Ministers have been deliberately stringing this out for two reasons. Firstly, because they thought that they could make some grubby political capital from the delay. And secondly, because they've been scrambling to get a flight organised and all the other logistics that are not in place.
And it's not just Labour who are critical.
I wish indeed that the bill had never been brought to this House in the first place and that we wouldn't have to debate this bill. I wish that it had never seen the light of day.
Outrage from my constituents also goes to the knowledge that what could be done with the money that has been spent on this nonsense scheme so far.
But the government has a majority in the Commons.
The ayes have it.
It's rejecting opposition here and from those changing the plans in the House of Lords, which means it heads back to the Lords tonight, and some there are not willing to give up.
I don't want the government to be allowed to tell the world a lie. The lie is that Rwanda is a safe country. In one particular respect, the Supreme Court has ruled that Rwanda is not a safe country.
What do you say to those who say this is the unelected House of Lords blocking what the elected government wants to do?
This is the unelected House of Lords doing exactly what it has been appointed to do.
In other words, to scrutinise, to change. But it looks like ping pong will soon be done. And then comes the only question that really matters.
Can you be certain that by the time of the general election you'll be able to prove that this policy is a deterrent?
This isn't just about one flight, right? Yeah, could you rush and get one flight off? Maybe you could, but that's not the priority here. The priority is being able to deliver a regular rhythm, a drumbeat of multiple flights a month over the summer and beyond, because that's how you build a systematic deterrent and that's how you will stop the boats.
That is the ultimate, the only test of success for this policy. Does it put people off getting in small boats and crossing the channel? And yes, in the last half hour, the Commons has squashed, again, those two proposed changes by the House of Lords. So it goes back to the House of Lords this evening. Do they decide to glue those changes back on again? They may well do. If they do, it goes back to the Commons, and then it goes back to the House of Lords, and so that could continue. So prepare for the potential for a splash of midnight oil to be burned. Assuming it does pass at some point tonight or in the early hours of the morning, then that big challenge, the government trying to make it work and prove that it works in putting people off getting in small boats, or at least by the time of the election, saying that it would if they had more chance to deliver it. Labour are saying if they win the election, they'd bin the scheme entirely.
Chris, thank you, and more, of course, from you at 10. Donald Trump has returned to court in New York to hear the opening statements in his criminal trial over the alleged cover-up of a hush money payment to the porn star Stormy Daniels. Prosecutors told the jury the case was about a criminal conspiracy and a cover-up, but the defence said Trump was not personally involved. From New York, Sarah Smith reports.
President Trump, how are you feeling, sir? How is he feeling? Uncharacteristically nervous, you would imagine, as he makes his way to the opening day of his criminal trial. First, his usual claims that this is a politically motivated witch hunt orchestrated by President Biden.
These are all Biden trials. This is done as election interference. Everybody knows it. I'm here instead of being able to be in Pennsylvania and Georgia and lots of other places campaigning, and it's very unfair.
Inside the court, we see a man accustomed to being in charge, now not in control. Forced to sit and listen to the prosecution's allegations, whether he likes it or not, with the jury carefully watching his reactions. The story of the porn star Stormy Daniels is central to the case. The prosecution said that paying her $130,000 in hush money was election fraud, pure and simple, orchestrated by Donald Trump. The court will hear evidence from Trump's former fixer, now sworn enemy, Michael Cohen. He'll describe making that payment on Mr. Trump's instructions. The defence will brand him an admitted liar and convicted criminal who's now obsessed with his former boss. Mr. Cohen was earlier involved in paying off a Playboy model, Karen McDougal, who also said she'd had an affair with Donald Trump. He even recorded a conversation with Mr. Trump about that deal, which the prosecution will use to show a pattern of behaviour. The first witness was David Pecker from the National Enquirer magazine. He bought Miss McDougal's story not so he could publish it, but so he could suppress it to help Donald Trump's political campaign. Mr. Trump is innocent until proven guilty, his lawyer reminded the jury, saying his behaviour was not criminal. There's nothing wrong with trying to influence an election. It's called democracy. Donald Trump will be back in court tomorrow. This case is expected to last 6 to 8 weeks. Now, the court has actually wrapped up for the day already, even though it's only lunchtime here, because one of the jurors has an emergency dental appointment, so there will be no more evidence today. On his way out, Donald Trump did stop and talk to reporters, as he so often does, and once again he was claiming that he's only being prosecuted because he's running for president.
This is a Biden witch hunt to keep me off the campaign trail. So far, it's not working because my poll numbers are higher than they've ever been, because the public understands that it's a witch hunt.
Now, it's possibly because of outbursts like that Donald Trump's defence team reminded the jury that they had been picked because they said they could be impartial and that they were to listen to the evidence in court and put aside any perceptions they had of Donald Trump and his public persona. That's what the defence will be hoping that they're able to do, and we'll be back here again tomorrow.
We will see you then. Sarah Smith, thank you. 2 men have been charged with spying for China after an investigation by counter-terrorism officers. The Metropolitan Police said Christopher Berry from Oxfordshire and Christopher Cash from East London are both accused under the Official Secrets Act. Our security correspondent Gordon Carrera is at Scotland Yard for us now. Gordon.
Yes, Christopher Berry and Christopher Cash are both to be charged with offences under Section 1 of the 1911 Official Secrets Act, specifically obtaining or passing on documents or information which could be useful to an enemy, in the rather old-fashioned language of that 1911 Act. But specifically here, we're talking about China. Now, the head of the counter-terrorism command here at the Metropolitan Police has said this was a complex investigation into very serious allegations. The 2 men were actually arrested more than a year ago, last March. And news of that only emerged last September. And at that time, it also emerged that Christopher Cash was working in Parliament as a parliamentary researcher for something called the China Research Group, set up by Conservative MPs to promote debate about China. Now, at the time, through his solicitor, he maintained he was innocent. And today also, the Chinese embassy has also reiterated a statement from last September saying any allegations of intelligence gathering were, in its words, malicious slander. But the 2 men will appear at Westminster Magistrates Court this Friday. Sophie.
Gordon, thank you. The time is just after 6:15, our top story this evening. Huw Edwards has resigned from the BBC on medical advice after a 40-year career at the corporation. And coming up, the pull of Taylor Swift, why this London pub has suddenly found international fame.
And on BBC London, they're blamed for blocking London's sewers. Now, a ban on wet wipes containing plastic is to be put into law. And ahead of the mayoral election, we look at what's being done to help London's housing crisis.
The Metropolitan Police has apologised to the mother of the murdered teenager Stephen Lawrence for breaking its promise to answer questions raised by a BBC investigation into his killing. Stephen was 18 when he was stabbed to death in a racist attack in South London 31 years ago today. Last year, the BBC's Daniel de Simone named Matthew White as the 6th suspect in the case. Here is Daniel's latest report.
The racist murder of Stephen Lawrence took place 31 years ago today at a South London bus stop. 2 of the original 5 prime suspects were convicted almost 20 years after the murder, but the Met's disastrous handling of the case means no one else has been brought to justice. Last year, the BBC publicly identified a 6th suspect, Matthew White, who died in 2021, and revealed multiple failures by the Met to properly investigate him. Now Stephen's mother, Baroness Doreen Lawrence, gives her first interview about the new evidence and the Met's response.
We knew there was 5, possibly 6. Now we know that there is 6. And the one that's just passed away, he's probably the key one who probably caused Stephen's murder. And they did nothing about it.
We showed not everything possible was done before the murder investigation was closed 4 years ago. Baroness Lawrence now has a personal message for the Met Commissioner, Sir Mark Rowley.
There's still lines of inquiries for them to follow up on. There's still 3 suspects out there, and I'm sure there's witnesses that probably could help them if they're interested. So I think that's what I'd like to see him do, is to instruct his team to follow up on those information, whatever is out there, because if you don't go and look, you're never going to find anything.
The officer now responsible for the case, Deputy Assistant Commissioner Matt Ward, promised Baroness Lawrence answers last year about the Met's handling of the 6th suspect, but failed to provide them. He wrote to her in January to say he's ashamed and regretful, and then went silent. Last week, her lawyer wrote to the Met Commissioner himself to complain. Now, in a statement to the BBC, Sir Mark says, on top of the failures over the decades, this is totally unacceptable. Restoring trust in the Met is one of my top priorities, and that includes how we work with those affected by the failures of the past. I apologise to Baroness Lawrence, who must have answers to all her questions. I have written to her and offered to meet. She says she won't settle for the Met's failures.
I don't think any mother would want to do that, and I'm no different. You know, I think all mothers will want to make sure that they're there to support their child if something happened, is to hold those accountable for what happened to that person.
Neil, from the BBC. 3 prime suspects, including brothers Neil and Jamie Acortt, remain free. They've always denied murder.
Were you there when Stephen Lawrence was attacked?
So would you like to see the investigation reopened?
Definitely so.
She says the outstanding suspects are cheating justice.
They're living their lives. They don't have to worry because the police have no intention of following up and seeking to investigate them. And they continue to get away with murder.
Daniel De Simone, BBC News.
Lucy Letby, the nurse found guilty of the murder and attempted murder of babies in her care, is applying for permission to appeal against her convictions. The 34-year-old was told last year she'd spend the rest of her life in jail after she was found guilty of murdering 7 babies and attempting to kill a further 6 at the Countess of Chester Hospital between 2015 and 2016. Her application is being considered by a panel of judges at the Court of Appeal in London. 5 mortgage lenders have announced they are increasing rates and more are expected to follow. Barclays, HSBC, NatWest, Accord and Leeds Building Society have made the announcement following increasing expectation that the Bank of England will not lower interest rates until August. Our economics editor Faisal Islam is with me now. What is driving this then?
Well, there's been a big picture change in world markets where at the beginning of the year there'd been an expectation of a few to several rate cuts in America and here in the UK starting around now. That's now dwindling. It's being pushed out to the sort of nearer the end of the year, particularly in America, but that's sort of rubbing off on markets for the UK too. And what we're seeing is that has affected the rates at which governments borrow over 2 and 5 years, at which banks borrow over 2 and 5 years, and now it's feeding through into mortgage rates. As you mentioned, big banks like Barclays, NatWest, HSBC, moving up some of their mortgage rates, marginally, fractionally, 0.1, 0.2%. But that's part of a trend we've seen since these rates kind of troughed at the beginning of the year, and they've started to creep back up, I should say. Other markets are doing quite well. We've seen a record in the FTSE 100. But in terms of these interest rates, it's fears that inflation is proving a little more sticky in the US and a little bit in the UK too, but also some uncertainty about the decision-making, whether there's splits on the committees that decide interest rates, the next meeting in a couple of weeks' time.
Faisal, thank you. Thousands of social media posts offering to sell new super-strength street drugs have been removed from major platforms following a BBC investigation. The powerful synthetic opioids known as nitazines have been linked to more than 100 UK deaths since last June. You can watch the investigation called The New Drug Threat in full. It's on the BBC iPlayer. The main TV tower in Ukraine's second biggest city of Kharkiv has been hit by a Russian missile. The local military says the signal has been cut to surrounding areas. Footage shows the top collapsing. It's the first time such a mast has been hit since Kyiv's major antennae was struck in the early weeks of the full-scale invasion. There are no reported casualties. The train drivers' union ASLEF has announced another wave of rolling strikes and an overtime ban. Disruption is expected from Monday the 6th of May to Saturday the 11th of May. The dispute has been deadlocked since ASLEF this month rejected the latest pay offer. Technology that's supposed to keep drivers safe on England's so-called smart motorways frequently stops working. That's what a BBC investigation has found. Panorama has revealed that in the last 2 years, equipment was hit by hundreds of power cuts, some putting safety equipment out of action for days at a time. Some smart motorways have a hard shoulder, most don't. National Highways says smart motorways are our safest roads. Richard Bilton reports.
Break down on a smart motorway and you could be in trouble. There are emergency laybys, the government is building more, but if you can't make it, you're trapped in a live lane. What's supposed to keep you safe is technology, cameras, radar and signals, but it can't help you if it's not working.
We found that on a regular basis, much of the safety equipment just doesn't work. Either no power or the kit itself is broken. So no vehicle detection, no cameras. It means the motorway's not smart anymore and you're on your own.
We put in a Freedom of Information request and found that between June 2022 and February this year, power was lost on the smart motorway network 392 times.
Well, if we've got to this point where we can't necessarily rely on the cameras to be in the right position, we can't necessarily rely on the radar or the signs themselves or the power outages, you know, what exactly are we left with to rely on as motorists when we're in quite a high-risk situation on a smart motorway in the first place?
Some of the details are staggering. Last July, there were no safety devices working for nearly 5 days on a section of the M6. In February, there were no signals, signs, sensors or cameras on one stretch of the M27 for more than a day. Also in February, at junction 14 on the M4, which has a hard shoulder, there were no sensors or warning signs for 11 days. We spoke to someone inside National Highways. He works on smart motorways, and he says he no longer trusts the kit.
Happens all the time. Happens all the time. Sometimes it's faulty, sometimes it's they're repairing something and they'll turn it off.
Do you trust the radar?
No.
Why?
Because I've seen it fail too many times.
National Highways says safety is its highest priority and there are well-rehearsed contingency plans to deal with power outages. Our data shows they are needed, a network with hundreds of dangerous failures. Richard Bilton, BBC News.
And Panorama's Smart Motorways When Technology Fails is on BBC iPlayer now, and it will be on BBC One at 8 o'clock tonight. Taylor Swift's new album, The Tortured Poets Department, was released on Friday and has already been streamed hundreds of millions of times. It has also sparked huge interest from her fans in a certain pub in London. I watch as you walk into some bar called The Black Dog, she sings on one track. The pub in Vauxhall was mobbed by Swifties. The pub's manager is naturally delighted.
It's been pretty crazy, but amazing. Like, so overwhelmingly positive. Everybody's been so lovely. The Swifties have been amazing. Endless photos, lots of questions about which ex attends frequently. I don't think we can speak too much on it, so I'll leave it a mystery.
The pulling power of Taylor Swift. Now, it's 100 years this month since the first BBC Schools broadcast was aired, with the idea of educating and entertaining children. And during that time, it has brought programmes like Play School to our screen. Remember Humpty, Jemima and their friends? Our reporter, Ricky Belletto, looks back in time.
A house with a door, windows, one.
For many, this is the sound of their childhood.
Ready to play? What's the day?
It's Monday.
We found your very first appearance on Play School. It's even got the old clapperboard there at the front. Have a look at that.
And this is Fluella.
Hello.
One of Play School's best-loved presenters, Baroness Fluella Benjamin, first appeared in 1976.
Don't you look smart, Big Ted? Education should be fun. Education should be fulfilling. Education should be exciting. And that's what we used to do for the children, make them feel excited about learning.
But in the early days, it was quite different. In 1957, BBC Television for Schools began.
The first of this afternoon's programmes for schools and colleges follows in 1 minute.
And remember this voice?
Hello, Word Watchers. I'm Wordy.
I'm Mr. Watchword, the Word Watcher.
I think after a very short space of time, we realised that Wordy was extremely popular with the children because of the feedback from the teachers and all the schools. That not only were they being entertained, but they were learning.
The way that young people and children get their educational content from the BBC has definitely evolved with the times. As we race into the 90s, technology transforms BBC Education. Bitesize, the online learning portal for young people, is launched.
We've got a little page here. Here we are. The GCSE Bitesize revision.
Becoming even more relevant during the COVID-19 pandemic as schools across the UK closed.
This is the BBC Lite programme.
From gathering around the wireless to live lessons streaming on smartboards.
And it's time for us to go now. Until tomorrow. Bye-bye.
Ricky Belletto, BBC News.
Oh, Play School. I remember watching far too much of that. That ages me a bit. Time for a look at the weather now. Chris Fox.
Yes, I'd say me too as well, Sophie. Today, well, we've had quite a lot of cloud with some damp weather, particularly affecting parts of England. Not the most inspiring of weather to head out and about. It's also been really cold. You've probably noticed that. Temperatures in Fylingdale, 6 degrees Celsius. The April average 11. Now, if you went outside and thought, well, you know, it feels a bit more like a winter's day, you weren't too far off the mark. Fylingdale's average in February is just 6 degrees Celsius, which is what we had today. It's all down to a ridge of high pressure in the jet stream in the Atlantic. We've got a trough over Europe, and that combination sends cold air spiralling across the UK from a northerly direction. And there's little change, to be honest. Over the next few days, it is going to stay cold. Cold and damp overnight tonight as well across England and Wales. There'll be some further patches of rain coming and going. Clearing skies moving across Scotland, getting to Northern Ireland and pushing into the far north of England as we head through the night. There'll be 1 or 2 patches of frost here. Tomorrow then, we've got cold wind pushing in from the North Sea affecting East Anglia. You'll notice that for sure. And still the remnants of our weather system we had today, bringing cloud and some damp weather as well. The best of the sunshine for Scotland, Northern Ireland and sunnier skies probably pushing in across northern England for a time too. Temperatures not too bad for Belfast and Cardiff, 14 degrees here, but 9 or 10 around some of those North Sea coasts. Factor in that chilly northerly wind. It's going to be another cold day and more of the same really to come for the middle part of the week. This time probably with a bit more cloud coming in off the North Sea, maybe a few patches of light rain or drizzle with that. The best of the sunshine across northwestern areas. However, temperatures will continue for most areas to be well below average. And to be honest, it's going to stay quite chilly through much of the rest of this week. Into the weekend, we swap the cold weather for more unsettled weather. So you probably have to wait really until next month until we get something a bit nicer. Sophie.
Oh, well, Chris, thank you very much. And that's it from the BBC News at 6. It's time now to join our colleagues for the news where you are. Goodbye.
Tonight on BBC London.
You are quite openly Jewish. This is a pro-Palestinian march. Right.
An officer's interaction with a Jewish man has called into question the Met's policing of pro-Palestinian marches.
With some calling for the Met Commissioner to resign, I'll have the latest on Sir Mark Rowley's meeting with the Mayor to discuss community relations.
Also on the programme tonight, meeting those who were given infected blood products in the 70s and 80s at London hospitals and how they feel ahead of a final report into the infected blood scandal. Also tonight, they clog up our sewers and pollute the Thames. Now, wet wipes containing plastic are to be banned from sale. And it was a record-breaking London marathon. We'll bring you some of the stories from the finish line. Good evening and welcome to the programme. First tonight, the Met Commissioner has been meeting the Mayor and members of London's Jewish communities today amid calls for him to resign in a row over policing of pro-Palestinian marches. It follows an incident where an anti-Semitism campaigner was called openly Jewish by officers and threatened with arrest. The Prime Minister says he has confidence in Sir Mark Rowley, but the Met needs to rebuild the trust of the Jewish community. Here's our Home Affairs correspondent, Sonia Jessup.
Thank you very much.
This is the incident that Gideon Falter says the Met Commissioner should resign over.
When the crowd is gone, I'll happily escort you out.
He says he was trying to cross the road through a pro-Palestinian march.
You are quite openly Jewish. This is a pro-Palestinian march. I'm not accusing you of anything, but I'm worried about the reaction to your presence.
An officer offers to escort him a different way, but he refuses.
If you choose to remain here because you are called a breach of these freedoms of other people.
After we'd been stopped by police, people started shouting abuse at us, and the police surrounded us and not them. They told us we were threatened with arrest, not them. There were people crossing the road left, right and centre in any direction they wanted to, and we were the ones who were being stopped.
But some have said, though the police officer's language was wrong, other footage shows a different picture.
They spent 13 minutes talking to him and trying to persuade him to go a different route along with his entourage. He declined to do so and then tried to push past the police officer.
The Met Commissioner has apologised. This morning he met with leaders from London's Jewish communities. The Community Security Trust said it had raised concerns over the impact of the demonstrations.
We urge the police and